Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Michael. I'm just going to try and keep this brief so that we can open it up for questions, but I want to make some general comments and then some specific comments about each of the talks and see if I can pull a few things together. But first, I want to thank Michael for inviting me to be discussant here. I am not an mHealth researcher yet. And this gave me a great opportunity to learn and to think about some of these things. The first point I want to make, and I don't think I can stress this enough, is that this is a critically important, I'm going to move you a little bit further, critically important area for health sciences and prevention science. The proliferation of apps for health behaviors is astounding, and we live in a digital world now. But those apps are guided by an entirely different vision than we have. So the people who are developing those apps, what's critical for them is how many times those apps get downloaded. For us as scientists, it's how do our apps and how do our procedures influence behavior and improve behavior. So we have to really move towards how can we as scientists contribute to this proliferation of what's happening in our society in a way that is benefiting the good, is increasing the greater good. The evidence base for these apps and for these programs and for these mHealth activities is relatively weak. And what I mean by that is we don't have a great deal of knowledge about how they're working. So that is a fantastic opportunity for us to dive headfirst into this area and really do great work. The second point I want to make is that the flexibility, the adaptability, the utility of these approaches is really important for discovery, for growth, for how we approach our field. So I am a family researcher, family intervention researcher, and a few years back, there was a really terrific study about how parents want to receive parenting information and parenting interventions. And they had a variety of options that were available to check, and the most desirable way for parents to learn about parenting and to be involved in an intervention was through apps or videos or online. Way down the list was multi-group family interventions that come together once a week for 12 weeks and learn these skills. But if you look at our evidence-based family interventions, they're all multi-family groups that come, not all of them, but we're behind the times. We're behind what people want, the way that they want to, bless you, the way that they want to receive information and the way that they want to influence their own behaviors. So we need to move into that space. Third, this approach is consistent with a growing area in prevention science and behavioral economics around evidence-based kernels. You may have heard that concept and that idea. And these kernels are the very basic or simple behavioral or cognitive influence techniques that can reliably influence behavior. We can use this. Dennis Embry and Tony Biglin have talked about this and written about this extensively. They're not programs. the way that we think about prevention science, but they're particular kernels that can be used in this way to influence behavior. I think for most people, prevention may not be about the programs. It may not be about having to be in a program for 12 weeks, one night a week for 2 hours. But it may be about these little kernels that move you, that nudge your behavior, nudge the way that you think about things, and shift your behavior slightly over a longer period of time. I think mHealth is a perfect example of how that nudging can happen. So some specific comments about the 3 talks. Michael's talk, I thought one of the really interesting aspects of his work, and I've known his work for a while, is the inclusion of the space and how important space may be. We in prevention science, we sometimes acknowledge the risk effects of space, neighborhood risk, less often the protective nature of space. But I think that our understanding of space beyond geography is really important here. What are the social, the psychological, the elements of that space that are promotive or protective? And of course that links with peers. Another important element, I think, in Michael's work is choice. So there's autonomy and choice in selecting the stress activities that they use. So it's important in all therapies, I think, to provide some element of autonomy and choice, and we see this in this work too. I really like the way that Michael thinks about how this work activates a reflective cognitive activity. So this is a hallmark of most therapies. How do clients think about their situations? And this might be primarily cognitive reflections on peers and space, but there may be other prompts that can be used in this kind of application that get them to think about other elements, their emotional reactions, their own thoughts and emotions. I'll skip that part. Let me say a few things about Brian's work, and I really admire the critical role of self-regulation, and we know how important self-regulation is to all behavioral development. And in his talk, I was really struck by the different kinds of support that are provided and how critical that may be to the effectiveness of behavior change. Again, kind of nudging people along without having to focus on making big changes. After all, it's about the self and about supporting those decisions and building that self-management. I'm really interested in seeing the progression of your research, examining other situational factors, the external and the internal, so shifting from Thursdays to weekends to celebrations. So I was a professor at Penn State for 13 years, and I remember drinking nights in State College were Monday through Sunday. So you could pretty much choose any day, and I remember standing in line, and one kid said, one college kid said to me, not to me, he said to his friends, he said, I like to stay in on Mondays. I don't go out to the bars on Mondays. That's good. Central to all of this work, and this cuts across, is optimal feedback messages. So what are the messages that we're delivering? And this is a critical step that we need to pay a lot of attention to, I think, and in the design of our trials. It may be very useful to use some alternative designs like micro-trials to really help us refine the nature of that feedback and really understand how people respond to that feedback in these micro-trials before we move out to the larger trials. Who doesn't love a Jedi? That is fantastic. So again, in some ways, the Jedis are predicated on an assumption that we know what to do, that we have the right messaging, that we can adapt the delivery of that, but we know what to do. Adaptive nature of those interventions, just fantastic, and that's the core of flexibility and utility and being able to move to a more personalized prevention approach. But the issue remains, what's the prompt? And will prompts have to be an element of that adaptation? So some prompts might really work for Michael, but not work for me. And can we adjust those? Prevention, in my mind, and maybe it's because I'm old, but has to do with building skills and building capacities that transcend the intervention moment and allow people to build these capacities longer term. And I think about some of the things that we're doing in these mHealth interventions as, are we building healthy habits? Are we building habits of health through this nudging along in certain ways? And that might be a really interesting avenue for testing. Sort of how do these affect long-term changes in behaviors and use of these healthy habits? And are we doing that during these interventions, or might it take a little bit of time pre-intervention to build some skills and then reinforce those through the mHealth interventions? So I think about that. I do some mindfulness meditation research, and meditation is used to create a state of mindfulness, but through that practice of meditation, daily practice of meditation, the idea is that we remain, or that we spend more time in that state, and we can transcend into a trait of mindfulness, which is kind of the propensity of being mindful in daily life. And there's some good evidence that that actually is how it works. So through these messages, are we helping to create these healthy habits of stress resilience or stress adaptation that transcend the next time they don't get the response? Can they activate that response on their own? So I'm going to leave it there and allow the audience to raise questions. So thanks again, Michael, for inviting me.